Let's bring this meeting to order and let's go ahead and do the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, and we'll have roll call.
Baker.
Here.
Broadway.
Here.
Harvey.
Here.
Holmes.
Here.
Nader. Rohan. Here. Powers.
Here.
Euler.
All right, thank you. And I was notified by Mr. Lukin that there's no closed session. So we are going to move directly on to item number D, which is minutes for the June 27th, 2018 approval. And I'm going to abstain because I wasn't here. But
Move approval.
I'll second.
it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
All right, thank you. Okay, item number F, public comment. Do we have any public comment? Pardon me?
Yeah, you missed the general review.
Oh. Thank you.
That was his public comment. Yeah, well done. It's showing up.
Item number E, agenda review. I checked the box already. Any, yes.
Madam Chair, we have a retitling of item L. It should read Public Participation Plan and Title VI Update.
Perfect, okay, thank you. And then does anyone have any items they want removed or further discussion for, or approve the agenda as is with that one correction?
Motion to approve.
Been moved in second, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you, sir. Okay, now item F, public comment. Do I have any public comment? Seeing none, I'll move on to item number G, which is the consent calendar. Do I have any questions
I
or?
have one question.
Okay,
Item 3, highway infrastructure apportionments. It says the 2018 Federal Appropriation Act included on-time additional funding under the highway infrastructure program. Does that mean we're going to get the money on time? Or should it be one time?
It's a one-time
Oh.
shot, that's what that means, yeah. And it's an additional funding of about $800,000 that came out of the FAST Act that we have the ability to apply to projects. And
Okay.
we have one recommendation on the consent agenda.
Okay, so it just needs to be changed to one time.
needs to be changed to one time. Okay, anything else?
No, that's it all.
All right,
Move approval.
I'll second.
it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Item number H. Am I moving to H, or no, that was consent item? Is that right,
Yeah,
Mike?
item H, and David Melko will be presenting this item.
Item number H.
Good morning, members of the board. Today, we're asking you to adopt Resolution 1827, accepting as complete the final short-range transit plans for Auburn Transit, Placer County Transit, Roseville Transit, and the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency. So we've been at this almost 11 months, and it's coming to a conclusion. So I'm sure everybody will be thankful for that. We can move on to the implementation phase. In April and May, you heard a number of alternatives. In June, we had a public hearing. And so today, we're here asking you to accept these documents as complete. The documents are available on the website by downloading the entire document, or you can go by individual chapters, including the appendices and the executive summary. Executive summary is attached to the staff report, and each plan basically recommends a number of high-priority strategies. I would characterize the plans as fairly pragmatic, not way out there. Of course, that depends upon, I guess, the reviewer, but I think we really try to work the plans so that they work within the funding levels and that the costs were reasonable with respect to the proposed alternatives. The high priority strategies are outlined in the executive summary, and we do have a brief PowerPoint that consists of 4 slides that will review the high strategy elements within the plans. And maybe at some point, we'll have those shown up on the screen. So we did have a public hearing in June. We received a number of comments. We had a 30-day public review period. We received comments from 26 individuals. Those individuals had 102 comments, and those response to comments are uploaded on the website, and they're also attached to your staff report, or to the staff report. And I won't necessarily go into and review the comments. The responses are there. If you have questions with respect to the comments, then I'd be glad to respond to those. So during July, we met with all of the transit operators, and we worked quite closely with the operators in updating and finalizing the plan and incorporating comments. A number of the public comments were also incorporated within the plan. Not all public comments have been incorporated. Not all are appropriate with respect to the short-range transit plan process. Some of them deal with issues that are beyond the scope of this particular process. The next step after the board accepts the plans as complete will be for the individual governing boards of Placer County Transit, Roseville Transit, and Auburn Transit to take action on those plans. Now, I will point out that between the time the board accepts these documents as complete, that there may be further revisions, minor changes, and so that's to be expected, and we will, as part of the process, then when those documents are finally adopted by those individual jurisdictions, replace the documents that we have on our website, and they will become the final approved documents by those particular entities. We're recommending that you accept these plans as complete. We've reviewed this with the Transit Operator Working Group and the Technical Advisory Committee, and they all concur with the staff recommendation. So before we get into any questions or open up to public comment, I'd like to briefly walk through each of the plans so that, once again, we have an understanding in terms of what the various high priority recommendations are. Well, hopefully you'll be able to see these a little bit better on your screen here. So this is the Placer County Transit map. It's a system map. And the plan elements, there's a variety of plan elements, and some of these are very common with all the plans. So, for example, there's a college pass program, there's a regional day pass program, various marketing improvements that need to be done by all the operators. And so each plan notes that, and each plan notes that probably PCTPA needs to be the lead with respect to facilitating that type of work amongst the operators so that we have consistency. There is also a battery electric bus study that's recommended that probably also should be led by PCTPA. The reason for that is you'll note that there are various fleet improvements associated with Placer County Transit as well as with the other transit operators, and also maintenance facility improvements. California Air Resources Board has a regulation that is being proposed, and if it goes into effect by 2025, some of the operators here will need to purchase zero-emission buses. And so that will mean that that's at the tail end of this short-range transit plan process, but good planning requires that you start now in anticipation of that rule requirement. And so rather than each individual transit operator doing their own thing with respect to electric buses, because that's probably the technology that will be that the manufacturers will choose for the buses. It's probably best that we do a joint effort facilitated by PCTPA and for all of the operators. And the implementation of the electric bus requirement depends upon the size of the operator, and so Roseville and Placer County Transit will probably face this hurdle sooner than Auburn Transit, but Auburn Transit will eventually have to move into that area. There are a number of route suggestions with respect to the Placer County plan. So just to highlight briefly, There's Route 49 on the Highway 49 route. Currently, it's a single route, and the recommendation is to break up the route, perhaps into 2 routes. This particular, we went through a lot of exercises on this route, and ultimately what gets implemented may not be exactly what's identified in the plan, but there is a need for improvements on Highway 49 because a number of people spend a long time sitting in the bus to get from one point to another, and there's probably a better way to be able to get them to their destinations back and from the multimodal center. The Taylor Road Shuttle basically kind of it stays the same with respect to its route deviations service. The frequency is recommended to go to hourly versus 2-hour. There are modifications in Lincoln on the Lincoln Circulator route. That route was implemented 2 years ago. We have data now, and so there's a way to improve the productivity based on the actual data that we have, and so the plan reflects that. There is a proposal for the Route S, which is operated by Roseville Transit, and it's contracted by Placer County to go to the Santucci Justice Center, perhaps to extend that route further, also under contract with Placer County, to serve more of the facilities that are proposed to go out into that particular area by Placer County over the next 7 years. In terms of dial-a-ride, the recommendation for the Granite Bay area, we looked at extending Roseville service there, continuing the current dial-a-ride, and the recommendation on the plan is basically to put together a transportation network contract with either Uber or Lyft or whomever that would provide an equivalent level of service. There may need to be still some ADA dial-a-ride, and perhaps that can be contracted with Roseville but the plan recognizes that the current service out there is not very productive, and there's a variety of ways that we looked at in terms of improving that service, and the transportation network option seems to be the best fit. That recommendation is also included in the Roseville short-range plan for Roseville, and so there may be synergies to have both operators work together. There are also recommendations for Placer commuter service. New service proposed for Lincoln, from Lincoln to downtown Sacramento. There are a number of people that have commented in the short-range transit plan that they need to get to downtown Sacramento. They are a commuter. Some of them have commented about how difficult it is to get a seat on the Placer County bus or even the Roseville commuter bus at Taylor Road Park and Ride. And so there is a recommendation for 2 routes in the morning and in the afternoon for that service. There's also improvements along the commuter service from Auburn to downtown Sacramento, and there's a recommendation to eliminate the commuter service east of Auburn to Colfax. Currently that carries 5 passengers, and so there is probably, we looked at having that service provided by Placer County Transit, which is actually a less costly option than running the commuter service. But ultimately, when you're dealing with 5 people here, the best option is to encourage those people to carpool and to go to the Auburn Center and then to pick the service there. There's also recommendation to add a 1-day per week route back and forth between Auburn and Colfax, sort of a shopper shuttle, midday type of service. And so that's pretty much covers the Placer County Transit overview. Next up, Roseville. Once again, there are sort of regional sort of studies, in terms of the electric bus study improvements, there's also marketing studies and the fare categories in terms of a regional day pass and a college pass program. There's also a number of bus stop improvements that are recommended within the Roseville Short-Range Transit Plan. Some of those are ADA focused, but also when you change routes, then you need to implement new bus stops and then put in improvements there. recommending extending Saturday service so that it's consistent with the Saturday service provided by Placer County Transit, so that employees in Roseville that may need to get to Rockland or get to Lincoln will be able to transfer from one system to the other. There is a service called C, D, F, G, and M, and so we went through the alphabet of those services. And the routes C, D, and M, they have unproductive early morning service, and basically we're recommending that the early morning service start a little bit later. So rather than have a 6 a.m., 6:30 trips, you push it back to, I think, 7:30 or 8 o'clock. There is a recommendation to eliminate the reverse commuter runs. So what is a reverse commuter run? So Roseville runs commute service from downtown Roseville and thereabouts to downtown Sacramento. And then they operate in a reverse commute option going back, which means there's a passenger or two that gets on the bus, pays a fare, and comes back to Roseville and goes to a Roseville employment destination. Generally, we looked at all the info. The service is not productive for that reverse commute option, and it's cheaper for Roseville Transit to operate that as a deadhead service that requires a contract renegotiation with the contractor that provides the service, because the service then will not be in service as going back, and so there's a different set of costs associated with that. So there's some savings there that can be had. Currently, commuter service goes to Maidu Park. There's 2 commuter trips, 10 people get on it. Roseville has done a number of improvements at Lewis Orlando, very attractive transit center. And so the recommendation is to shift the commuter service over to Lewis Orlando, where there is more services connecting and where there are more people boarding and alighting from buses. So that's an inconvenience for the current commuters that go to Maidu Park. It's 10 people, and they would have to go about 2.5 miles over to Lewis Orlando. So that's the trade-off. Number of Roseville commuters requested midday service. So you're down in downtown Sacramento and you need to get home for some particular reason, and so a recommendation to do a demonstration midday commuter run. This type of service is also provided by El Dorado Transit on their commuter, as well as Yuba Sutter, and they do that. So it's not unfamiliar within the area. A number of Roseville patrons also indicated that they would like to be able to get over to the Richards Boulevard area because state offices are gravitating out to that area. And currently it's a little bit difficult because you go downtown and you got to transfer to the Green Line, which is RT's light rail that goes to Richards, and then you got to somehow catch an RT bus along, Richards, and then get to your employment destination. So current services could be deviated to Richards Boulevard to accommodate that. That would require an adjustment in the commuter schedules, and that pretty much wraps up Roseville Transit. We go to Auburn Transit. So a lot less lines on the Auburn Transit map, but that doesn't mean that we didn't look at it in any less detail. It's just a smaller area. So the biggest thing with Auburn is currently Auburn Transit operates 2 routes, and those routes, if you're a patron that wants to get from one part of the city to another, the average travel time on the bus is 40 minutes. That's a long time. And so we, with the consultants, work to restructure the 2-route system into a 3-route system. So basically, and you also are mindful of costs, and so we looked at the service hours and the service miles associated in totality with those 2 routes, and basically broke up those 2 routes and reallocated those miles and hours to create 3 routes. So there's really not a cost increase, at least according to the consultant, with respect to this proposal. And this will reduce the in-travel time to approximately about 15 minutes, which is a more normal travel time for most local bus travel. And so that's a recommendation within the plan. Plan also recommends that Auburn Transit raise its fares to help improve fare box productivity. Currently, the fares are $1. A number of passengers transfer from Auburn to Placer County and vice versa. So the plan looks at going up to $1.50, but there's also a step to go to $1.25. So if we go to $1.25, that matches Placer County transit fares, and so it makes the transferring easier. But the Placer County Transit Plan also looks at raising its fares to $1.50, so we also look at that here as well. And the reason we looked at the $1.50 is because Roseville's base fare is $1.50. And so if we're looking at trying to use the Connect card and create a regional day pass, we need to have, it helps the passenger if we have consistent fare across the system, because there's a lot of travel that occurs just within Placer County between these systems. So there's two options on fares for Auburn Transit. Once again, a number of buses need to be replaced. I think most of these bus replacements occur in 2026. So that's 1 year outside the plan, but we recognize that here because we wanted to point out that at some point, Auburn will also have to then move and may want to think about replacing those buses with zero-emission buses, because that rule is going to be out there for them to deal with. And so with that, we have them also a recommendation that they participate in the electric bus study. There's a number of improvements that could be done with Auburn's website with respect to transit and its maps and brochures. I think the best way to characterize it is, all marketing literature needs to be refreshed, and it's been a long time. And so it's just time to probably to refresh this marketing literature. And then there's service to the Auburn Airport, and that service came about as part of an agreement between Auburn and Placer County to serve the food bank and the businesses along Loxley Lane. That was facilitated through the unmet transit needs process. It was not an unmet transit need that was considered reasonable to meet, because we were able to negotiate that on a voluntary basis. So it's not a mandatory that thou shalt have to do this. And we've been at this for a while, and the service is not very productive. And I believe the food bank has moved or is proposing to move. And so with that, a major impetus there will mean there will be a change in that service. That change in that service, when I spoke about the Placer County Transit Plan, we talked about making changes to Highway 49 and breaking it up into two routes. So the second route for Highway 49 would then take into account not going to the airport, and so it would serve the North Auburn area. But the crux of any sort of second route for Placer County Transit on Highway 49 will be when the traffic signal goes in at Loxley Lane, because it's difficult for the buses to make the turns without that signal. But the bottom line here is that there is no real reason for the city of Auburn to continue to participate in a route to the airport, because there's really not anybody using it. And so it does leave open options on how Placer County wishes to do its Highway 49 service. And so that plan recognizes that. And then lastly, on the marketing side of it, we recommend that Auburn get on Google Transit. Roseville and Placer County Transit are on Google Transit. It's somewhat time-consuming, some staff work in terms of working with Google to get the info uploaded, but it is of benefit to a number of individuals that use the mobile phone devices, and being able to find out when the next bus or when bus service will be coming along. And that summarizes the Auburn plan. And then lastly, the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency, CTSA. So as you can see, the CTSA covers a huge territory. I mean, in terms of services, I mean, it's basically one and the same with Placer County Transportation Planning Agency service area, but it focuses on what's considered the west slope, and the blue area is considered the west slope. The plan includes a recommendation to increase the Health Express service. We're carrying somewhere annually about 6,500 boardings, which is, if it was a dial-a-ride service, it would be considered a fairly productive dial-a-ride service. Now, this is an inner-city service, and we get a number of trip requests to go to Sacramento. We go to Sacramento 2 times a week. Plan looks at perhaps introducing a 3rd time a week. Most of the services go to the Mercy Hospital area, as well as the Stockton Boulevard UC Davis medical area. We're also recommending increase the service 4 hours a day. We have come up with people who indicate that if I make a doctor appointment at 4:30 and your service closes at 5 o'clock, I can't get to the doctor appointment. And so there are a number of people that are in that situation. And so if we expand the service span hours, we'll be able to accommodate those trips. On the My Rides program, which is a volunteer transportation program, there is a component for vouchers, where vouchers are issued if for a particular reason that Seniors First can't find a volunteer to provide that person that drive option, and that person can't use a public transit for whatever reason. And so the thinking here is that we would implement an agreement with a transportation network company, that we would issue a voucher that would then be able to provide a ride for that particular senior or individual with a disability. On the bus pass subsidy program, we've had that in place now for 4 years. We have subsidized somewhat over, a little bit over maybe $14,000 in passes. It's not anywhere near where we had originally anticipated when this was proposed by the Placer Collaborative Network. The feedback that we've gotten is it's difficult to do for the social service agencies, because they've got to go to Roseville Transit to buy some passes, Placer County Transit to buy passes. When they buy passes from Placer County Transit, they can only buy one-way ride tickets because of the way it's set up, and it's similar with Auburn. And the recommendation by the consultant is that we implement this through the Connect Card program, because then the Connect Card could then be used on all of the services, eventually Auburn Transit as well, and so it will make it easier for the agency that is purchasing the passes to be able to do so through that mechanism. And so hopefully it will then be a tool that will help their clients get to wherever they need to go and solve some unmet transportation needs. We have a recommendation to assist Seniors First with purchasing route scheduling software for their Meals on Wheels and My Wheels program. This was kind of a contentious issue associated with, maybe contentious is not the right word, but strong issue raised by some other transit operators about getting into this arena with respect to the Meals on Wheels, and maybe opening sort of a Pandora's box and getting into an area that we historically haven't been in, but our purpose is to coordinate or provide social service transportation. And in this issue, we're looking at coordinating, and so we're helping to provide a tool that would better assist the delivery of meals to people out there in Placer County that rely upon this program. So it's a scheduling software, and the plan, I think the cost is not to exceed $2,000. That's what was identified within the plan. And on the call center, the recommendation is to continue to fund the call center, and of course, on the CTSA staff report item, I can get more into discussion on that when we ask the CTSA board to adopt that plan. And then there's also a recommendation to fund a regional mobility management program. Currently, the CTSA assisted Roseville to pursue a grant, and I think this was back in 2012 or 13, and there was a federal grant that was received. That federal grant will run out, I believe, in 2021. And so if the program was, the purpose of the program is to basically provide mobility assistance to people who need to be travel trained. And so this is a program that is used by a number of operators across the country. You have a number of operators that operate rail, big bus, but they also have to provide ADA complimentary paratransit services. And so they have a number of people that use ADA complimentary paratransit services, as well as general public paratransit services. Those trips are costly. They can, I think the average is $30 a trip. And when you compare that to a bus, and in this area, a fixed route bus is, per passenger is somewhere between $6 to $10 a trip. You try to put in place programs where you can teach and help those people get more comfortable using the fixed route service. And so that's the purpose of this program. And so it was considered a worthwhile program, and so the recommendation from the transit operators is that we should continue the program, which would mean that we need to find a home for it, and the home is with the CTSA because we are in the CTSA is in the business of coordinating and providing and helping social service transportation, including seniors and individuals with disabilities and individuals with limited means. And so it was felt that it fits within that program, which means that post-2021, that you will, when we talk about the CTSA short-range plan, there will be an impact with respect to the CTSA budget, which will mean more local transportation funds will need to be allocated to that unless we can pursue additional federal funding. So that summarizes the CTSA short-range plan, and with that, I will take any questions from the board. You may want to open it up for some public comments, and then once again, staff recommends the board find that the short-range transit plans for Auburn, Placer County, and Roseville Transit and the CTSA are complete, and there's a resolution in that regard.
Thank you. You have something, Mr. Holmes?
Yeah, I just have a comment regarding the Loxley Lane route where the Auburn Interfaith Food Closet is. The food closet is still there. They do have a capital campaign to build a facility closer off of Interstate 80 on Auburn Ravine. So that's probably going to be a 2-year, hopefully a 2-year project. So just wanted to clarify that.
Okay.
David, who's going to pay for these zero-emission buses?
Public, citizens.
How, though?
Through various revenue-raising mechanisms. Zero-emission buses, there'll be some federal funds, there'll be some state funds, and there will need to be local funds that we currently use to purchase buses that will be used to leverage those federal and state funds. The cost for the zero-emission buses is probably at this point in time, double the cost of a CNG bus. So that will mean that fleet replacement will probably occur over a longer time period for smaller operators because the cost to upgrade infrastructure to charge buses, or if you get into a hybrid like a fuel cell, then you're going to need to have a hydrogen fueling facility. And so it just means everything will probably take a little bit longer to replace.
Including
And that's why we have the recommendation for the regional electric bus study, so that perhaps there is, rather than each individual operator going their own separate ways, that perhaps pooling resources makes sense, in this particular locale. And so There should be, so that through that, some cost efficiencies. But in the end, all these public programs are taxpayer funded. And so
Yeah.
they come through revenues raised through various means, from citizens. And then they get allocated through a variety of grant programs. And we will pursue those grant programs to the extent that we can, and hopefully we'll be successful, and that will offset some of the cost. But it will probably, for the smaller operators, just stretch out some of the fleet replacement.
And are you working with the Placer County Area Resources Board for some of these grants?
Not at this particular moment, but as part of the electric bus study, we certainly can engage them with that, because that could be another potential entity that could help, fund or point us in the direction of funding. So, yeah, I think that's a good suggestion.
Well, when will that study be done? Because the last thing you want to do is wait until it's required to try and get that funding, 'cause everybody's going to be fighting for that money at that time.
Right. Well, that's a good question. So, first step is we got to have the board accept the plans here, and then we have to take the plans to Roseville, Placer County, and Auburn and get them to approve the plans. And then we can start engaging in talks about how to, to fund the study and to kick it off. I mean, I guess in best cases, this might be a study that would perhaps begin, next fiscal year.
Okay. And how about the call center increases?
Well, I purposely chose not to talk about it now, and I guess it's up to the pleasure of the board. We could talk about it as part of the CTSA.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
Staff report. That's where I kind of focused it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Public comment?
Good morning, I'm Tink Miller, Executive Director of Placer Independent Resource Services here in Auburn. And I've commented on this back when they were presented before, but just want to reiterate that I absolutely support them. I've been very, very pleased to see some innovation and creative thinking that has been integrated into these plans. I think they're forward thinking, and I'm very happy to see that. And I do always want to state for transparency that I did participate in review sessions of the plans as they were being developed. So I have a deeper interest perhaps than just the public at large. And I just, I don't want to do real long comments, but I do want to particularly thank and applaud the willingness to fund the cost of the trip planning software for seniors first. Meals on Wheels is not just delivering lunch. It's a gatekeeper program. It keeps people safe. Sometimes that's the only person they're going to see all day outside their home. And if there's a problem, if they don't come to the door, the person delivering the meal can call for help. So it's a really significant, valuable program, far more than just delivering lunch. So I applaud the agency for committing to fund that software. $2,000 software is not a small purchase. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Mike Karabedian for Placer Group Sierra Club. I want to thank you for the response to our comments, which are very helpful, kind of a roadmap about how our goal of having transit back and forth between Lincoln and Roseville, how we can take steps. It's one approach about steps we can take to accomplish that. And what you've done with this program, the local transit, shows that, I mean, you are our transit people. And this shows that you can work well with transit and move it forward as needed. Now, of course, our view is that the local transit system the core of the local transit system is the rail transit corridor in that corridor, tied into this. So that is the only thing that is really going to relieve our congestion in the short and long run, to have that kind of local transit tied into that sort of system. And a couple comments. I'll just focus on one thing here. But the Sierra Club, we work on transit and walking and biking. I mean, that is what our advocacy is in general and has been for decades. So when we're talking about integrating the core, integrating local transit with a regional transit core, we're talking about people being able to walk from their home to work, to school, and be able to do it without having to use their cars. Now, what I think I'll just look at in a few seconds, a minute or two this morning, is what transit means to our young people. I grew up in San Francisco, first 5 years in the Mission District, where I could walk a couple blocks in each direction to get to the different streetcars. And a story I'll tell is about a five-year-old kid on that street who one day walked out of his front door, walked to the streetcar, got on the streetcar, went downtown to Market Street and went to his mother's workplace, all by himself. Now, that caused a lot of consternation in the neighborhood, but this guy is still today, even at my age, still involved with the Navy SEAL culture. I can't say that there's a connection between the independence he felt then and the bravery of this little kid, but the point is, our kids, in the summertime especially, the summer doldrums, which can lead to problems, or if not, I'm not just talking about TV or use of social media and stuff like that, other problems we've all seen. Kids need to be able to get to where they need to go, whether it's regional entertainment centers, right up to the time they're 18. My son, who's half my age, has lived in 2 major cities in this country and in Berlin, and he's only now thinking of getting a car for the first time, a millennial. So we should be, both our developers and the planners should be looking at ways to not have parents having to be chauffeurs for kids, and affecting their job and career possibilities, either parent, but figuring out a transit system that works, that kids can get on and go other places, including the regional transit. So we're looking forward to working with you because you are our transit, and to build what we hope will turn out to be a regional transit corridor between Lincoln and Roseville, back and forth. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back for,
Madam Chair, I move adoption of resolution number 18-27.
it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Okay. Item number L, title, let me say it right, Public Participation Plan and Title VI update.
Madam Chair, we need to recess as part of the CTSA before we do that.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm going to adjourn as the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency and convene as the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. I have 1 month off. And go backpacking in the woods, I can't remember anything. Sorry about that.
That's right.
I'm going to adjourn as the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency and convene as the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency. And we have a consent calendar to approve. Item I. Anyone have questions about it? Consider the consent calendar approved. Public comment?
And I move approval of consent calendar.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I'll trade you spots. Item J.
Okay, so this is my item. We're requesting the board adopt resolution 1826, approving the final short-range transit plan for the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency. So as the board, we're asking you to adopt. So you'll be the first out of the gate, so to speak, to adopt a short-range transit plan, with the other jurisdictions following along. So, just like the previous presentation, the short-range plan is uploaded on the site. It's available by, chapters and appendices, and you have the executive summary before you. There's a number of there's about 9 high-priority strategies. They're outlined here in the bullets. I actually just went over those moments ago in the slide, so I will not do that again, unless, of course, you have questions or comments regarding that. I will focus on the financial scenarios with the plan, and to follow up with Director Harvey's question on the prior item. So, as part of the CTSA is funded primarily by transportation development funds, and I know you've heard this many times because we come before you with Transportation Development Act related items, but there's 2 parts to the Transportation Development Act. There's a local transportation fund, which is basically the quarter-cent state sales tax. It was approved back in like 1971, and it is returned to the county of source. And then we, as the administrating agency, the PCTPA, allocate those funds to the jurisdictions, as well as to some high priority items identified in the Act, one of which is the CTSA. The second part of the TDA is the state transit assistance, and those funds come through the state controller. Both those funds are under the Act, where the Act allows us to go up to 5%. It just says up to 5% for these types of programs. So historically, up till 2009, the CTSA was funded at 5%. Now, in 2009, you all recall, we were in the midst of the beginning of the Great Recession, or the middle, and that particular year, when I was doing the apportionments, we actually did 2 adjustments to the LTF apportionment that year because sales tax revenues were dipping. And so what we had forecast was, the first time was off, and then the realigned forecast was off, and we had to then make a second adjustment. And that's like the only time that's happened in my 13 years here at the agency. So as part of that, the recommendation by staff at that time was to reduce the contribution to the CTSA from 5% to 4%. And we've been able, over the years, to manage with 4% and to fund the programs. So bottom line in the short-range plan is it's a 7-year plan, and so in fiscal years, and you just adopted the budget in June. In 18-19, it's based on 4%. Fiscal years 19-20 and 20-21 will also remain at 4%. In 21-22, the plan bumps up to 4.7%. And then it stays it basically goes to 4.8% at year 2025. So we worked real hard to try to keep it under the 5% number. The reason it bumps up in 2022 is because some of the programs kick into a different gear, so to speak. We have agreements with Roseville on the call center. The federal funding for the mobility grant program expire. We have an agreement on the transit ambassador program with Roseville. So those programs will need to be renegotiated, and of course, in 4 years, costs increase, and so we have to account for what we can see as reasonably foreseeable cost increases. Seniors First, also, there's a bump up within that agreement, which was approved by the board because a third person comes on at that point in time to expand the My Rides program even further into the Tahoe area and to work with agencies up there. So there are some cost increases built into the plan, and we reviewed those with the TOG, and the TOG felt comfortable with those. At the suggestion of the city of Colfax, city manager, Wes Heathcock, it was recommended that we develop a policy. And so the policy is identified in the staff report here. And basically, it just says that the annual funding allocation should vary as necessary between 4%, not to exceed the maximum 5%. And it will depend upon the specific annual amount necessary to fund the actual program costs. So what that does basically is it means that, and it's not to say that there's not scrutiny when we do the budget, but the budget process for the CTSA probably will take a little bit longer. Currently, we do the budget, we start it in May, because that's when we kind of get revenue estimates, and we come to the board in June, and you adopt the budget. In October, sometimes we come back with an amended budget. We'll probably need to start the budget process in March. That will allow at least 2 additional months for TOG members to be able to review the programs and costs and to think about cost containment strategies, or other alternatives that we may want to take into account. So hopefully that will then lead to the point that we have an agreement with the transit operator working group, who would recommend to the TAC, who would then recommend to the board here a budget. So in June, everything would be hopefully okay and approved. The reason I say we start March, because we complete the unmet transit needs process in February, and you adopt a preliminary apportionment for TDA funds. And so at that point in time, we have a number that we can work with. So the other part of the policy that was recommended is that prior to, any TDA allocation, and I pretty much have already said it, we work with the Transit Operator Working Group and the Technical Advisory Committee to determine if there's any reasonable and cost containment strategies. And so, as I outlined, that whole process will probably begin in March. And with that, everybody was very pleased with the recommendation on the policy. I think at this point, if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. You may wish to open it up for public, comment, and then at the conclusion of that, I would recommend that you adopt the CTSA short-range plan. I did want to make note of one oversight on the prior item. We sent out flyers to a number of people, English and Spanish. We have a database that's like 2,600 people. So we made any individual, any group, any stakeholder that was interested in this process, we let them know about it. And all of the response to comments that were in the packet for the agenda item for the PCTPA, where you accepted the plans, those were all sent out to those stakeholders, the 2,600 group, as well as emails to the actual commenters themselves. So they had the opportunity to see those. So just, full disclosure.
Ken, do you have a question? Your light's on.
Sorry? I have no questions.
Anyone else? Public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back for approval.
Move adoption of resolution number 18-26.
Second.
Moved in second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Okay, now, we're going to adjourn as the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency and convene as the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency and go to item number K, update on coordination between 2040 Regional Transportation Plan and SACOG Metropolitan Transportation Plan.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. This item you have before you this morning is a very important item on our overall work plan. It shows how we work together with SACOG on development of our Regional Transportation Plan and Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Aaron Hoyt will be making a presentation. We also have some additional folks here as resources, and also James Corliss of SACOG, who wishes to make a short comment on this process. So this is the beginning of this process, and Aaron will outline the steps that we'll be taking to update our plan along with SACOG's Metropolitan Transportation Plan.
Thank you, Mike, and good morning, Board of Directors. So just to recap, we did kick off our Regional Transportation Plan back in last November. Presented an overview of what the plan is, the various requirements that we're required to undertake every 5 years to ensure that we're continuing coordination with our cities, county, Caltrans, everything within Placer County on the topic of transportation. In the end, the Regional Transportation Plan is really a mechanism that allows individual projects in your jurisdictions, as well as our regional projects, to access state and federal monies. So if the project's in the plan, we have the opportunity to search out and receive those federal and state monies. As a regional transportation planning agency, our RTP must look out 20 years And in the plan, it needs to identify a policy element and direction to guide us through the development of the plan and how we implement projects over those 20 years. We're also required to include a reasonably foreseeable revenues from various fund sources that we anticipate over this 20-year time period, and how those revenues fit with the short and long-term transportation projects to ensure that we can financially constrain and only identify those projects we think we can reasonably fund. There are a host of other check-the-box topics that are included in the regional transportation plan, but these are the primary kind of core areas of the RTP itself. And if you picked up our last RTP, it's approximately 375 pages. It kind of goes to the extent that there are a number of other check-the-box topics that we're required to include in this plan. Over the next few months, one of the first things we'll be bringing to you is a discussion of revenue estimates. This is really a core piece of the RTP to identify what can we fund over a period of time. Our prior regional transportation plan for 2036 identified a revenue estimate of $5.9 billion. Most of those monies were shouldered on the kind of the backs of locally derived revenue sources such as the sales tax, gas tax, regional impact fees, transit fares, and also a future transportation sales tax measure was incorporated at that point in time. So we can see that a large chunk of our future revenues to implement projects really come from Placer County, the residents who are paying and buying things within the county. We don't necessarily see any significant shifts in the fund sources that are shown on, or the distribution of fund sources, where they're coming from. We also think that the revenue estimate could be relatively similar in our upcoming plan. But there are a number of things that we are looking at and monitoring and will be coordinating with SACOG on, namely the November elections with Senate Bill 1. There's also discussion and kind of thought that the gas taxes that we pay at the pump today will continue to decline over time as vehicles become more fuel efficient. So that will eventually erode our revenue sources. There's also future sales tax district, local transportation measure that's being contemplated in Placer County, so that we'll continue to look at that for revenue sources. And also there's a variety of other fees and revenue sources that are being looked at a much broader scale, and we'll have to determine whether some of those are appropriate here in Placer County and whether we can take advantage of those. So these are some of the items we'll be bringing back to you for discussion as we look at trying to really hone in on what our revenue estimates are or will be going out to 2040. And in the end, again, those revenue estimates will be utilized to financially constrain all the projects that each of your staff has presented to us and SACOG for the Regional Transportation Plan. One of the next items you'll start to see after that is our outreach efforts. Part of our regional transportation plan is just that, reaching out to the community to ensure that our projects that are incorporated in the plan are also visioned and supported by our local residents. Many of these projects come from general plans, the circulation elements, but to ensure that we're still on the right path with how we program out these projects or identify these projects within the RTP. Our efforts will continue on with the tried and true. We're going to look to stakeholders and trying to reach out to civic organizations, the Rotaries, the chambers, anyone else who has an established meeting that we can go and present information to on the RTP and jointly in combination with the funding strategy for Placer County. So those two items really go hand in hand as a long-term vision, both of projects and funding. We will also continue our recent efforts and some of our successes with doing online and virtual online engagement. We've seen a number of successes. David mentioned that we now have a stakeholder database of about 2,600 people who participated through the short-range transit plans, but we also have other avenues to reach out through your public information officers, other social media channels to drive people to more of an online surveys and receive information in that manner to help supplement. All right, we're back on track somehow. To further expand our geographic reach and getting information from all of our cities and all of our counties. And in doing so, we're going to formalize, and Luke will talk about this, in the next agenda item, but developing a public participation plan that goes along with our Title VI requirements. So we'll be formalizing how we're reaching out, who we're reaching out through that effort. And our first meeting will actually be a joint workshop led by SACOG, held at Sierra College on September 4th. So part of their Metropolitan Transportation Plan Sustainable Community Strategies, they're required to reach out to all 6 counties. And so they'll be doing so, coordinating with us on that. And that'll be one of the first outreach meetings that we'll do, and we'll continue to look at our online engagement, our meetings with local civic groups, clubs, moving on into the future, and any requests by your agencies to make presentations at a more local level within the cities or transportation commissions. I'm going to pause there briefly just to see if there's any questions, comments about our process moving forward with the RTP before we talk about the integration of the Regional Transportation Plan into SACOG's Metropolitan Transportation Plan.
I don't see any.
Okay. So moving up to about 35,000 foot level, we can see that Placer County is one of 6 counties within SACOG's federally designated Metropolitan Planning Organization boundary. Those include Yuba, Sutter, Yolo, Sacramento, and El Dorado counties. Both the Regional Transportation Plan and the Metropolitan Transportation Plan are developed to meet very similar topics. They're all they're both 20-year plans. They identify projects, programs to be implemented. They both have to be financially constrained. However, SACOG, because they are a federally designated MPO, have some additional requirements that they have to look at within their Metropolitan Transportation Plan. In the end, our transportation projects in our plan are incorporated into SACOG's MTP, Metropolitan Transportation Plan, by way of our MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, that's in place. In terms of looking at their MTP, how it's different, how it's similar, they also have a component required of Senate Bill 375 to look at greenhouse gas reduction emissions within the 6-county region. If we look at the MTP, very similar topics here to what was shown on the RTP slide. They look at land use forecasts, job forecasts, revenue estimates, transportation projects, but one of the added items for them being a federally designated agency is the Clean Air Act. So they look at air quality conformity for the 6-county region. Without attaining air quality conformity over time and the different regulations that are required, we're unable to meet or implement future transportation projects if we're unable to meet air quality conformity. So there's one difference there. Also, as a result of Senate Bill 375, they have to look at a sustainable community strategy, which is scenario-based planning analysis and forecasting of how different types of land uses in different areas, different growth patterns, in combination with those transportation projects, can help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The Air Resources Board recently increased SACOG's greenhouse gas reduction emissions increased it from 16% up to 19% per capita reduction by the year 2035. So in doing so, it'll bring on a number of other challenges of how we are able to, in the 6-county region, meet that new target. SACOG has continued to update their committees, boards, some of which you may sit on or your colleagues sit on, and have heard updates on the various challenges that they foresee and the process to which they are going to update their MTP. So I wanted to highlight here 3 different challenges that we are aware of, that we've talked with your staff about, we've heard from staff about, those namely being, as I mentioned, ARB's decision to increase the greenhouse gas reduction target to 19% per capita by 2035. This will be a big hurdle, and I think SACOG staff has done a good job of relaying this to staff and committees and boards of how this increase will be much more challenging to meet. And they've developed a discussion draft scenario of land use and transportation projects to try to demonstrate whether they can meet this new threshold and what it will take to meet it. It will require some creative thinking and analyses on how do we take advantage of some of the emerging technologies within the regions. Are there benefits to Uber, Lyft, transportation network companies, and what can the change in land uses do? So they're looking at a variety of things to try to determine whether or not we can meet this target. But one of the biggest drivers in reducing the greenhouse gas emissions is just that, it's driving. So with the discussion draft that they released back in May, formalized in June, is looking at how land uses that are and have been in prior plans have been focused maybe more in the developing areas, aka greenfields, how the plan may work if some of those land uses are pushed more into established areas or developing areas that are closer to transit, closer to jobs in the region. So again, by moving people closer to, and these are all future developments, how people move closer to jobs, closer to transit and transportation can reduce the amount of driving. They're also faced with the issue of decreased housing stock. So after the downturn of the economy and through the recession, we saw that housing almost came to a standstill. And we still haven't quite recovered fully to our prior levels of development, and so that's delayed how much housing's been implemented. So a combination between the reduction in housing forecasts going out to 2040 and the combination of looking at a more compact development pattern, it's led to some projects, some development projects, not being incorporated in the draft discussion scenario. In addition to that fact that a lot of the land development and development that occurs in our local jurisdictions, we look at a build-out time frame, which is a full build-out of land uses that could take 20, 30, maybe 50 years for all that to build out, where the MTP is looking at a 20-year window, and that is it. So it's not to say that other development may not occur, but it just may not occur within the 20 years for the 6-county region, or they're anticipating that it may not occur during the 20-year region. And lastly, to point out one of the issues here is that we had a call for projects with all the jurisdictions within Placer County, and SACOG did the same for the other 5 counties, to look at our project list. Our project list still accurate? Have the projects changed? Have priorities changed? Are there new projects to the list? And so those all have came back to ourselves and SACOG, and throughout the 6-county region, SACOG's identified that there's been an increase in projects about to the tune of $2 billion in additional new projects, in addition to $2 billion additional in maintenance needs over the course of the 20 years. So that's something that we are wrestling with to try to determine, do we have enough revenues for these projects? Are some of these projects maybe developer-driven, be funded locally through development, as opposed to seeking out federal and state funds? In the next coming months, there's additional areas of coordination that you will hear from SACOG if you or your colleagues are part of their committees and boards, and that we will also be bringing back to you. First being the joint outreach workshop held at Sierra College on September 4th. We will also be bringing back to you revenue estimates back in the September and October timeframe. In the December timeframe, SACOG will be taking to their committees and boards the preferred scenario framework. So right now, as I mentioned, there is a discussion draft scenario of land use and transportation projects. And after some testing and modeling, they'll be looking at whether or not they can or cannot meet that 19% greenhouse gas reduction threshold. Following that, we'll then be developing a final preferred scenario for SACOG's Metropolitan Transportation Plan in the spring, and again, bringing back scenario performance measures of that preferred scenario to their committees and boards. So there are many more opportunities for us to talk about this, issues to kind of discuss, and how we ultimately achieve our end goals of including our transportation projects and seeing that the plan developed really kind of meets all of our needs, but namely the air quality conformity and the greenhouse gas reduction targets. And to kind of come back full circle to the PCTPA TPA, our Regional Transportation Plan, this highlights or illustrates over the course of the next year and a half how we get to adoption of the Regional Transportation Plan in February 2020. The various milestones will be heading out, coming to you in next upcoming meetings are the financial revenue estimates, constraining those projects and starting to work and receive some performance outcomes from SACOG on how the plan will perform. Really in 2019, the bulk of our efforts are developing the plan, writing the chapters, doing additional outreach, and then releasing the draft plan and environmental impact report in late summer, early fall of 2019. During that process, we've at least identified here at a high level that we're going to continue to do stakeholder presentations throughout the plan. There's some virtual workshops and online engagement that we're going to try to target for later this fall and then spring that'll help drive people, as in our intent, drive people to participate in the plan, review the documents, review some of the projects that are in the list. And we also have structured, public hearings when we release the draft plan and environmental impact report, as well as adopt the final plan and environmental impact report. So with that, I'd be glad to take any questions. And again, as Mike mentioned, James Corliss, CEO of SACOG, is here, as well as any of your staff that may be able to answer any questions that you have on topics that we've discussed today, or any commentary that may come up.
I don't see. Okay, go ahead.
I would like to first ask, what was the greenhouse gas emissions requirement the last time the MTP was done?
That was 16% greenhouse gas reduction by
16,
2035.
and before that, do you recall?
It stayed the same. So this will be the third time that the Sustainable Community Strategy will be updated. The first two greenhouse gas reduction targets that SACOG was required to comply with was 16%. And the Air Resources Board, throughout the state, following really the adoption or certification, the second round of all the metropolitan planning organizations within the state, relooked at the greenhouse gas reduction targets and adjusted essentially every MPO's targets upward. And I will let James really take it from there if there's more details on that, of how the negotiations, what was the impetus about driving it, those targets higher.
Do you have anything to add? Can you
Come on up here, James.
Well, first of all, good morning.
Welcome.
It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm James Corliss. I'm the relatively new CEO. Some of you are on the board, others I haven't met yet, and I would love to do that. So, as Aaron said, we had two 16% targets last time around. The state gave us a 19% target this time. The SACOG board took a position saying we can get to 18, we can't get to 19. We have an asterisk in the 19. That asterisk actually is an opening for us to create a pilot program in the 6-county region to actually look at environmental streamlining and getting quicker approvals on development projects, transportation projects, and electric vehicles. It's kind of up to us to make that real in the next 12 months, but it's a small opening. It's a percentage point, but it's an opening. And we made a case to the state that our regional economy is not LA or San Francisco or San Diego. We're different. So we've got that opening of a pilot program, and I do want to come back to that maybe at a future board meeting because it's going to be really important. We try to make good on that.
Great. I did have one other question. I continue to be confused about whether or not the MTP SES can cause a modification of the RTIP. And I apologize to the audience about all of the alphabet letters. We'd be here a lot longer if I didn't use them.
So I can take that one. So the Regional Transportation Plan, or the RTP, through our Memorandum of Understanding, the projects that are developed locally, identified locally, filter into SACOG's Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy. Now, there could be a situation if we are unable to achieve air quality conformity and the federal and state regulations on air quality, and or be unable to achieve the greenhouse gas reductions. That does open the window to looking at how can we meet it, what might be some of the, on the SACOG end with the MTP, what might be some of the levers on the land use side or the transportation side that could help to meet those two standards. So there could be a opportunity or potential for looking at our regional transportation projects, either maybe when those are programmed in terms of timing, or whether they're maybe in this 20-year window in this cycle at all.
Okay, thank you. One more question. I think it would be timely for you to talk a little bit about the genesis of the introduction of economic prosperity into the plan, because I suspect people are going to read about it or hear about it, and this would be a good opportunity for the context of that to be discussed.
Thanks very much. I did want to say a few things also just on the MTP and its relationship, because I'm sure this feels like a bit of a black box, and it feels like SACOG is far away and nestled at the foot of the state capitol, and I want to try to demystify that as much as possible. So as I mentioned, I'm relatively new. I actually worked a lot of other mid-sized regions around the country, metropolitan regions, and I saw how they were trying to actually take the transportation question and ask the bigger question, which is what's our economic future? How are we going to grow? What's our play? I know for a fact that we don't want to be and can't be a state government town, right? That cannot be our economy in the 6-county region. So my question to all of you, to everybody in the region is, what's our economic, where are the bets we're making? We're working very closely with GSEC and Barry Broom to figure out, can we better marry, more closely marry infrastructure and economic growth? What are the future economic clusters that we want to attract here to this region? And how do we use transportation to spark that kind of attraction? Those advanced economies in life sciences and healthcare, food and ag actually is one of our biggest clusters. So that's the question that we're trying to answer in terms of how we can get less reliant on the state government. And I know that's maybe more of a core issue, but actually use our infrastructure investments, much as we did through the Amazon HQ2 bid. I think we learned a lot on Amazon HQ2 in terms of whether we were ready or whether we weren't, where the employment centers were going to be in the region, and how we can use infrastructure to ready those employment centers for those future jobs.
Thank you.
Any other? Stan?
Have we been able to build a case for the fact that much of our air quality challenges come transported to us from other regions? Just because of where we're located at the base of the mountains? We, for a long time, Bay Area people didn't even have to have their cars smogged.
Right.
And yet we were getting air pollution. And I realize you can't color air to say, well, it's their air coming into our air, but I hope we can have tried to build a case that we're in a challenged basin, so to speak.
San Joaquin Valley has the very same issue, right? They get a lot of the emissions coming over from the Bay Area, and they get the consequences. I don't think we have been successful, honestly, on that, in that regard.
Should we try to? I mean...
And the other question is wildfires, which is what our board is asking about. So what's the air quality and even the climate impacts, right, of all the wildfires, which we're going to take back to our board in September. I think we should try. I'm absolutely happy to look into that and see how successful we've been so far on sort of the transmission over from the coast. I would love to say just a few things if that's okay.
Yes, please do.
Again, thanks for entertaining me and having me up here. The reason I'm here this morning is because I really do want to demystify who is SACOG, what are they up to, what's the MTP versus the RTP. It's important to me. When I joined SACOG 15 months ago, I got 31 board members, and I went out to each of their jurisdictions and met with them and sat down with them, so I understood all of your challenges locally. That was not a meeting I wanted to take in the downtown Sacramento SACOG office. I want to come out to you and understand your jurisdictions. So I just want to quickly say the what, the when, and the how of this 6-county plan and how it relates to the RTP here in Placer County. So the what, okay, we are not winning a popularity contest by this plan. I understand that. I get it. A lot of this is imposed upon us by the state and by the federal government. But it's important we understand what it is. And as Aaron was saying earlier, if we don't hit some of these targets, bad things will happen. We'll be cut off from funding. The Atlanta metropolitan region was actually their tip was locked down because of air quality conformity issues right around the Olympics. That is not what you want to have happen when you're about to invite the world to your region. So this is a constrained budget, and think of it that way, right? This is not an aspirational, visionary document. We are looking at a constrained what-if budget on the transportation spending side and on the jobs and housing side. That is what it is. Having said that, and I just want to build on what Aaron, you sort of saw that the numbers are lower in terms of future growth in the 6-county region. The only reason that is because that recession, we bottomed out so hard in the recession, and housing starts almost stopped, right? So and I'm happy to give you the numbers on a 6-county level. Even the draft plan, the scenario we're looking at right now, is I think roughly about 10,000 housing units per year for 20 years. That's on average. So the plan does not try to stifle growth. We actually ask the questions about how do we grow successfully. So it's a constrained plan. It's a phasing document too. So you hear about whether you're in or out of the plan, or you're in the back end of the plan or the front end of the plan. This is about trying to time, from a regional perspective, land use, housing, jobs, infrastructure, so that we are phasing this appropriately. So that's sort of the what of this plan. And again, if we don't hit those targets, we actually lose money. My hope in this region, what we can do, the many things I want us to do as SACOG for all of us, is to get better about competing for state and federal funds. I want to win. Right? In SB1, congested corridors, we actually, for the first time, won more than our population share in this region. We got Highway 50 HOV lanes, we got HOV lanes on I-5. We won more than our population share, and LA was not happy about that. That should happen more often, as far as I'm concerned. Right? So we want to have access to those funds. So that's the what. The when, Aaron did a great job of that. The good news is our 6-county plan and your Placer County plan are synced, right? So the timing is very similar. We have a draft scenario that we're running right now, and it's very draft to see if we can hit the 19% target. We'll release that this fall. And then next spring, our board will adopt a final scenario. So we have sort of the results from this draft this fall. We get into a final adoption this spring. So sort of October through April of next year, really important. And then the MTP gets adopted in February 2020. So just to have you all understand the timing. And it's really important, not only do we hit that target, but we hit the milestones on adoption of that plan. And then finally, the how. Public input, you heard September 4th, Sierra College. That's the in-person coordination public outreach meeting. We'll have an online component, as it sounds like PCTPA will as well. We want to get as much public input as possible. Just as important is coordination and communication. So again, I'm here this morning because I want to try to demystify what this plan is, the role of SACOG, and what this plan is not, right? So this plan actually is not our economic vision for the region as much as we're trying to infuse sort of economic growth in it. And it's really important, I believe, that we hang together as a region. There's the only way that we're going to be successful and compete. So if you have issues, and I'm sure you will, or questions, or you want us to come and talk to your councils or your board of supervisors, we will be there. We'll try and be as transparent as possible about this. I'm sure we'll have a lot of backs and forths. Again, in a constrained budget document, which is what these plans are, I know sometimes it's we have to say no to projects because we don't have the money. And we have to look out in the 20 years in the future through a very fiscally kind of constrained lens. That should not stop us from being ambitious and aspirational. That's the challenge we have. But again, thanks for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Stan has a question.
As we look to reduce the number of miles that people drive, particularly to get to work, I think it's important that we give some attention to attainable housing, because I think the data shows that people are driving farther to get to work because they're having to go further out to find a house that they can afford. So as we look to try to improve air quality, if we don't address the attainable housing situation, we're never going to get there, because people are going to drive further to get to where they live and between where they live and work.
And that problem is only being made worse by our really low numbers on housing starts and housing production. Let me tell you something else too in terms of, and I know there will be lots of questions always about what's SACOG doing on land use, and are you messing around with our general plans? The MTP SCS is not a general plan, okay? It is a constrained budget document. I'll give you an example of, and it's, yes, what we want to do is try to get more people on different modes, as you heard from your previous presentations, but we also want shorter trips, to your point, right? So let's just take the case of Elk Grove. So Elk Grove is growing fast, one of the fastest growing cities in California in the early 2000s. We want Elk Grove to be an employment center, right? We don't want Elk Grove to be a bedroom community and have people jam up 5 and 99 every morning. We want them to grow jobs. That's really important. So my question is, how do we help Elk Grove grow jobs? Not just because it's good for the region, but also because it's really good in terms of balancing that commute.
Susan, do you have your lights on?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Anyone else? Thank you, James.
Thanks.
Thanks, James.
Any public comment?
Thank you. Mike Garabedian for Sierra Club. Just have a question. The county's 2007 master transit plan, does that relate to the two process we're talking about, and when does that review and renew? Thank you.
Sure.
David or?
Well, we'll tag team here. So, the 2007 Transit Master Plan, it's a long-range transit plan that was developed and approved by this board. It basically provides the blueprint for transit expansion over the next I think the plan looked out at 25, 30 years. And so that contains elements including bus rapid transit and fleet expansion and greater frequencies of service. And so those policies and projects and strategies sort of serve as the foundation or are incorporated into what we look at when we do the regional transportation plan in terms of future transit services. Because the short range plan only goes out 7 years. So we have that document to use as the foundation for the out years of the RTP. And then with that, I believe SACOG also incorporates some of those planning strategies as part of their transit modeling and transit network development for the 6-county region. I don't know if you have any. No, that's all right. In terms of updating it, there's no prescribed schedule for the update of the plan. We've talked about in the past about doing an update. The current master plan is still valid, even though it was developed pre-recession and some of the financial and the population numbers are different. The overall strategies and the blueprint in terms of transit service expansion is still valid. I mean, in sum, the plan basically calls for hourly service throughout the county 6 days a week. And so I think in terms of that overall aspirational, long-range type of strategy, I think it's still a sound strategy, given today where we are in terms of land use and transportation issues. And so there's no, requirement to update it at this point in time. But certainly as a staff, I guess we could go back and look at that as part of the development of maybe future work programs and
Thank you, David. Any other public comment? Seeing none, thank you very much for the report. Thank you, James, for coming today and presenting as well. And we will move on to item L, Public Participation Plan and Title VI update.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. Very quickly, this item was brought up at our last board meeting. Every number of years, we are required by a certain amount of state and federal requirements for a number of programs that we're working on to upgrade our Title VI program. The Title VI requires us to implement measures which comply with the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and to avoid discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin. So we're in the middle of preparation of a plan to address those, and we're also in the middle of several efforts promoting public participation. And so when we're doing things like our outreach for our MTP, RTP process, when we're doing outreach for our funding strategy, we're going to be implementing a number of strategies to effectively reach out to the public. So not only is this an update of our legal requirement under Title VI, but we want to make sure that when we are going out and having a conversation with the community, a lot of these topics are very dry in nature and might not get the input that we wanted to achieve with things like the MTP or the RTP. And so we're going to be combining efforts wherever possible and really having a conversation about transportation. So just in closing on this item, wanted to, part of this is to alert the public that we are in the midst of updating our legal requirements under Title VI, and we'll be bringing an item back to you in September with that formal plan, but really to let the board and the community know that we are going to be coming to them to have a conversation about transportation, which includes multiple facets, the MTP, RTP, the funding strategy, the projects that we're currently working on that affect the public. And so we wanted to just outline that very quickly to you and let you know that we're going to be combining resources, combining conversations, so that we achieve the maximum amount of input from the public, from the residents of Placer County, using all these multiple mechanisms. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have, and we will bring this plan formally, the legal requirements under Title VI, back to you at the next meeting.
Great, thank you. I don't see any questions, so we'll see you in September.
We do have up on the screen where people can comment, either by contacting us directly by phone or by our website. They can comment in on the preparation of that plan.
Great, thank you. So we'll move on to Executive Director's Report.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just an update on a number of activities that we have ongoing, including the funding strategy. Wanted to provide the board a quick update on some of those things and answer any questions that you might have. With relation to the funding strategy, as you all have probably seen by email or other methods, we are in the midst of, as the board authorized, a request for proposal process for an outreach consultant. That process will conclude on August 31st. We are expecting proposals back from at least 3 or 4 teams of individuals who will propose to assist us with the funding outreach component. That RFP was again circulated between August 1st and August 31st. We would like to have the board, again, as they did in the prior effort, provide participation in the selection process. And what we're proposing, and we will contact you directly, is that a representative from the proposed South Placer County District, tax district, we have a representative from each jurisdiction that would be in that district participate in the selection committee. So a little bit larger than the last selection committee of 2 individuals last time. We would like to invite members from each one of those to be part of that selection committee because it is such an important process. And we have tentatively scheduled September 10th is the day that we would have interviews for that process. We are aiming at having a contract ready for you at the next meeting and getting that consultant on board and doing a lot of background and preparation for a workshop that the board, in our last discussion on this, talked about having after the November election to make any adjustments to the outreach strategy that we've identified. We'll also be doing, at the tail end of that effort, an RFP for a polling firm to assist in the outreach consultant in the type of message in relation to transportation that would be desirous to achieve the maximum educational process for transportation and transportation projects and those needs. I wanted to just, actually, one other item related to that. Staff is also going to be, as we have limited resources, staff is, unless we hear otherwise from the board, would like to pursue a Caltrans Sustainable Communities grant to fund a portion of those outreach activities. They wouldn't be available in the first year if we're successful at that, but in the second year of public outreach, it could aid us in those outreach activities and provide needed funding for those activities. So we're going to be pursuing in the next cycle a grant that would fund a number of those outreach activities. So maybe I'll just stop there real quick and add, is there any questions on the funding strategy and where we're
Your
moving
button's
at
on.
this point?
Do you have a question?
Hit it with his knee.
That happens a lot. Any questions? Carry on, Mike.
On the latter half of September, specifically on September 28th, James and I are going to be in front of the Chamber of Commerce Quarterly Governmental Affairs and Economic Development meeting, kind of doing a little bit of what we did here this morning. We're going to be explaining, what is this MTP, RTP process? How do we make Placer County a better place? How do we attract economic development to South Placer and the entire Placer County, and all the chambers of commerce participate in that. And so wanted to alert you that that meeting will occur from 8 to 9:30 in the morning on the 28th of September at the Randy Peters Conference Center in Roseville. Another activity that we're implementing right now is we're updating, we haven't done it in some time, but we're updating a new transit map, a countywide transit map for Placer County. That was one of the items in the smaller items in the short-range transit plan process. And so David and Kathleen are going to be working with a TOG to produce a map that's probably going to be in both electronic and printed format, and something that's really useful that shows people how to get from one part of the county to the other, or to other locations throughout the Sacramento region. So we'll be working hard on that with the TOG and bringing that to you as a finished product. We did submit our application for the Highway 49 gap closure project to the CTC, and so we're anxiously awaiting to hear something from the CTC probably in the September timeframe. We have heard that there has been over 500 applications submitted on a statewide level, which is about 100 more than were submitted in the last round. We also have the opportunity to work on, to submit a smaller application, so a piece of that application, if you will, to SACOG for the regional ATP funding round, and we're working with our jurisdictions participating in that to develop an application. And the emphasis in this is SACOG has a different scoring criteria that they use in their regional local funding round, and we have to pick an area that would score highest and have a realistic capability of being funded. So we have to pick the best area within that larger grant application. We're working very hard with the town of Colfax to implement the roundabout project that would connect Highway 173 to Interstate 80 and to the business downtown community of Colfax. This is been a challenging project to fix not only this connection between these two roads, but also to look at a safety issue of an acceleration lane on Interstate 80. And so we've been working with Caltrans headquarters, with the district director, Amarjeet Benapal, and his staff, along with Colfax and us. A lot of time and effort's been going into looking at this project. We may bring something back to you regarding this project at the September meeting. Lastly, I wanted to mention just one of the things that our staff does, and it's a real opportunity. Actually, our deputy director, Luke McNeil-Caird, is the moderator. I got to get this right. The moderator of the RTPA, which is an adjunct organization to the California Transportation Commission, which really allows a discussion with agencies throughout the state of direct input into the CTC process. And so it's very, very important meeting and great opportunity. Celia had done it in the past, and now Luke is heading that effort up, and so it's a very important position that it allows us to have a level of information and input that we normally wouldn't have. And so there's a number of activities, and for the sake of time, I'll keep this short. But that group is talking about things such as HOV lane implementation on a statewide level. There's a lot of jurisdictions throughout the state are looking at HOV lanes as a measure to allow persons to use the HOV lane through the fast track process, but also it's a pricing strategy that we can use to actually come up with conservation measures for air quality attainment in things such as our MTP that was discussed earlier. And so we're going to be working with local district, with headquarters, with this organization to implement that. As a result of this meeting, staff is going to be meeting with the executive director of this organization, making her aware of some of the projects that we're working on, Susan Branson and her staff. And it gives us, again, a unique opportunity to showcase our projects here in Placer County. We were alerted through this process with the CTC that $2 million for the PS&E process of the Capital Corridor Third Track was allocated by the CTC, so that's very good news that that's moving forward. Also related to that, there is interest on behalf of Caltrans and CCJPA to look at the next potential congested corridors grant application as a potential to look at for phase 2 of the third track project. So that's something that we'll be looking at. Of course, it's dependent upon the November election, but that's something that we're excited about in terms of moving that forward to go from the 3 trips a day that we're going to get in phase 1 to the 10 trips a day in phase 2. Couple last things we did, Caltrans did receive environmental approval for a SHOP project to upgrade 6 lanes, upgrade 6 bridges in Placer County on Interstate 80. So that's a very needed thing to improve the movement of traffic up and down Interstate 80. So that project is moving forward. And lastly, we are monitoring a process. Right now, there's a lot of the ATP projects that have been submitted over the years to the state for various projects, and we may be bringing back to you at a future point in time an amendment to some of our ATP projects, and so we're gaining through this process an insight of what is acceptable to the CTC and what is not acceptable to the CTC. And so, again, Luke working directly with this organization, with the CTC, gives us some insight on how we can adjust our projects and our priorities, specifically with ATP, and achieve those changes as necessary. With that, I will conclude my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Seeing none, no questions. You have any board direction to staff? Seeing none, there's informational items in tab number O, or letter O, and we'll see you on Wednesday, September 26th. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.